This card is fake, and you are a fraud. Clara Voss's voice, thick with venom, shattered the quiet elegance of Sterling Trust Bank. We do not serve your kind of money here. A hand clamped hard around Serafina Sterling's arm. Officer Rhett Kane, his face a mask of petulant authority, smiled with pure contempt. You heard the lady. Coming with me? Sweetheart, let's see how tough you are in a cell. He had no idea that the woman he was attacking in her emerald silk dress was the adopted daughter of the man whose name was carved into the bank itself, the city's greatest benefactor. What happens when petty prejudice and brute force collide with unimaginable power? Where do you stand on this story? Give it a like and subscribe to witness a reckoning of epic proportions. Sunlight filtered through the towering arched windows of Sterling Trust Bank, catching motes of dust that danced like diamonds in the air. The main hall was a cathedral dedicated to commerce, a cavern of polished marble, rich mahogany, and gleaming brass. The only sounds were the muted whispers of wealthy clients, the soft click of expensive shoes on the immaculate floor, and the gentle rhythmic hum of money being counted, moved, and multiplied. It was a sanctuary of old money, a fortress built on generations of accumulated power, where every transaction was an act of faith in a system designed by and for the city's elite. This was a place where lineage mattered more than currency, and the unwritten rules of social standing were enforced more rigorously than any federal regulation. Into this bastion of discreet, conservative wealth, Serafina Sterling arrived like a living jewel, a flash of vibrant color in a world of charcoal gray and navy blue. Her custom midnight blue Bentley purred to a stop at the curb, attended by a parking attendant who seemed momentarily stunned by her quiet, commanding presence. When the door opened and she stepped out, the city's sidewalk felt as though it had become a red carpet. The dress she wore was a simple emerald green silk tunic, a color so rich and deep it seemed to absorb the surrounding light. The fabric clung to her figure, revealing a body that was at once sculptural and voluptuous. Her skin was the warm, polished tone of teak, and a cascade of tight, glossy curls framed a face of stunning symmetrical beauty. She was tall, carried herself with regal poise, and the generous curve of her bust was enhanced, rather than hidden, by the deceptively simple cut of the dress. She was a walking paradox in that environment, a woman of undeniable, almost dazzling beauty and imposing presence, who also happened to be black. In the world of Sterling Trust, this was an anomaly, a variable the system had never been programmed to calculate. As she entered the bank, a subtle but palpable wave moved through the lobby. Conversations faltered, heads turned, eyes accustomed to assessing wealth and status, with a single glance widened with a mixture of admiration and confusion. They saw the dress, the bearing, the aura of effortless confidence, but all of it arrived in a form that defied their expectations. From her glass-walled office overlooking the entire floor, the branch manager, Clara Voss, watched the entrance. Clara was a woman in her 40s with sharp features, carefully styled blonde hair, and cold, pale blue eyes that missed nothing. She considered herself the guardian of Sterling Trust's legacy. The protector who ensured the bank's impeccable reputation remained untouched. She had clawed her way into this position through ruthless ambition and an almost supernatural ability to cater to the whims of the city's wealthiest families. She did not see herself as an employee, but as a member of their class, and she defended its exclusivity with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its hoard. Every instinct in her body, instincts sharpened by a lifetime of carefully cultivated prejudice, screamed that the woman in the emerald dress was an imposter. "Jennifer, who is that?" Clara's voice, a low hiss through her desk intercom, bristled with suspicion. Her assistant's nervous, fragmented reply came back. "I don't know, Ms. Voss. She doesn't have an appointment." Clara watched as Serafina approached the priority banking counter, bypassing the short line with a polite, apologetic smile to the teller. She presented a card. It was not a standard debit or credit card. It was a thick rectangle of black metal with an elegant platinum S engraved on its surface. The sterling signature card, the highest tier of private banking, reserved for individuals with net worths in the 8 figures or higher. The young teller, Cole, glanced at the card, and his professional composure evaporated, replaced by pure astonishment. "Of course, ma'am. Right away. How may I help you?" he stammered. "I would like to withdraw $100,000 in cash," Serafina said, in a calm, melodic contralto. Clara Voss shot up from her chair. 100,000 in cash, from an unknown woman of color holding a card that supposedly belonged to the city's most reclusive and powerful dynasties. The pieces did not fit. In Clara's meticulously ordered world, they could not fit. It was a glitch in the matrix, a fraud so bold it almost felt insulting. And she, Clara Voss, protector of the realm, was going to be the one to unmask it. She smoothed her severe gray blazer, a cruel, satisfied smile touching her lips. The game was about to end. Serafina waited patiently at the counter, a portrait of serenity, apparently unaware of the waves of suspicion radiating from the manager's office. She understood the power of image, the silent language of wealth and status. The sterling signature card was not merely a banking tool, it was a key. It had been designed to open doors, silence questions, and command immediate, unconditional respect. It was a symbol of her father's power, a power he rarely exercised in public, yet one that underpinned the entire financial and political structure of the city. For Serafina, however, it had always been a double-edged sword. It granted her access, but it also subjected her to a level of scrutiny and disbelief that her white counterparts never faced. She had learned long ago that for a woman who looked like her, possessing such wealth was not regarded as an achievement. It was treated as a curiosity that demanded an explanation. Young Cole was sweating. A cash withdrawal of this size was not unusual for signature clients, but it required managerial authorization. He hurried to Clara's glass office, holding the black card as if it were a sacred relic. Serafina watched him go, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaping her lips. She had expected a simple, swift transaction. She needed the money for the deposit on a series of large-scale sculptures for the new pediatric wing of the municipal hospital, a project she was funding herself. It was a quiet, anonymous act of charity. Now it was turning into a spectacle inside the office. Clara took the card from Cole's trembling hand. She ran her thumb over the engraved S. The weight felt right, but her instinct, a dark well of entrenched prejudice, told her it was a forgery. A very, very good one. "Did you run the card?" she asked sharply. "Yes, Ms. Voss. The account is valid. The name is Serafina Sterling. There are more than enough funds. The account is active." He swallowed hard, a balance I've never seen before. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Sterling, the same name as the bank's founder and current chairman, the enigmatic and solitary Arthur Sterling. It could not be. Arthur Sterling was an aging, wealthy patriarch whose family traced back to the city's founding fathers. He was a widower, and it was widely known he had no biological children. This woman, this extravagant creature in the lobby, could not be a Sterling. She was a plant, a scam, probably some mistress or a con artist who had somehow obtained a stolen card. "The name is either a coincidence or part of the scam," Clara decided instantly, her mind a fortress against any evidence that contradicted her prejudice. The system can be hacked. An account this large would be an easy target. But the biometric scan, it matched, Cole offered timidly. When I inserted the card, the keypad required a fingerprint. It matched the registered account holder. Clara narrowed her eyes. The fingerprint was a problem, but not insurmountable. For a fraudster capable of forging such a sophisticated card, faking a fingerprint would be child's play. She had seen documentaries about it. Silicone molds, she said with authority, dismissing his concern. A common criminal technique. She stood. Decision made. She would not be the manager who allowed a 9-figure account to be emptied by some charlatan from the wrong side of town in a silk dress. She would be the heroine who stopped the crime of the century. Her actions would surely earn her the gratitude, and perhaps even the personal attention, of Arthur Sterling himself. It was the perfect opportunity to prove her worth and rise from mere manager to a true confidant of Sterling's inner circle. She handed the card back to Cole. "Stall her," she ordered. "Tell her a transaction of this magnitude requires additional verification for her own protection. Be polite, but firm. I'm going to handle this personally." Cole returned to the counter pale. Clara watched him for a moment, then picked up the phone. She did not call the bank's internal security. They were too slow, too protocol-bound. She needed someone who understood the nuances of street life, someone who would see what she saw, a criminal who did not belong. She dialed a direct number on her desk. "Officer Kane, please," she said, in a voice soft as silk. "This is Clara Voss at Sterling Trust. Tell him I have a problem, a possible high-level fraud in progress, and to come prepared." She hung up, a thrill of anticipation racing through her veins. The trap was set. Clara Voss emerged from her glass fortress, gliding across the marble floor with the predatory grace of a shark that had scented blood. She moved with a determination that drew every eye in the lobby, transforming the quiet space into a silent theater with herself as the star. The air crackled with anticipation. Clients paused mid-transaction. Tellers froze with their hands suspended over keyboards. Everyone sensed that the unwritten rules of their gilded world were about to be enforced with violence. Clara savored the moment, the weight of every gaze upon her, the sensation of her own perceived importance settling on her shoulders like a royal mantle. This was her domain, and she was about to expel an intruder. She arrived at the priority counter and positioned herself beside the nervous young teller. She ignored Serafina completely for a long, deliberate moment, instead picking up a piece of paper and pretending to review it. It was a classic power move designed to diminish, to make the other person feel insignificant. Finally, after a silence that stretched uncomfortably, she looked up. Her gaze did not meet Serafina's eyes. Instead, it traveled slowly from head to toe in a dismissive evaluation of her dress, her jewelry, her very existence. "I am Clara Voss," she announced, in a voice that rang with an authority she believed was hers by birthright. "I am the manager of this branch. There appears to be a discrepancy with your request." Serafina met her cold stare with an expression of serene calm. "A discrepancy?" she asked in a quiet, steady voice. "I wasn't aware of any. The funds are available." "The funds are not the problem," Clara replied with disdain, a small, cruel smile on her lips. "The problem is the card and the identity you are trying to use." She held out her hand. "May I see your driver's license, please?" Serafina withdrew a slim, emerald green leather wallet from her bag. She removed a driver's license and laid it on the counter. The name read, Serafina Sterling. The address was an expansive private estate in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, perched atop a hill. The photograph was a perfect professional close-up. Any reasonable person would have concluded the transaction was legitimate. But Clara was not a reasonable person. She was a woman driven by a prejudice so deep it had become the guiding principle of her world. She looked at the license and pushed it aside with contempt. These are easy to forge. A flash of something, not anger, but a deep, weary disappointment, crossed Serafina's face before it was replaced by a mask of serene composure. I can assure you it is entirely real, just like the card. If you are concerned, you may call the number on the back of the card and verify it with the private client division. They will confirm my identity. This was a direct challenge to Clara's authority, and it enraged her. She wanted submission, fear, a tearful confession. Instead, she received logic and composure. "I don't need to call anyone," she snapped, raising her voice, losing her professional tone, and revealing the intolerance beneath. "I know a fraud when I see one. You come in here dressed like you're going to a nightclub, trying to pull 100,000 in cash. What? Your dealer doesn't take checks?" The venomous, vulgar accusation hung in the rarefied air of the bank. A collective gasp swept through the lobby. Cole looked as though he might faint. This had gone far beyond a simple verification issue. It was a public humiliation, a brutal, repulsive smear. Serafina did not raise her voice. She did not react to the insult. Her calm was now a weapon, a shield of dignity that Clara's poison could not penetrate. "You are making a serious mistake, Ms. Voss," she said, lowering her voice to a low, quiet tone that somehow felt more intimidating than a shout. "You are making assumptions based solely on your own prejudice. I suggest you complete my transaction before you embarrass yourself and this institution any further." The word prejudice was the final spark. For Clara, who considered herself a sophisticated, cosmopolitan woman, the accusation was the ultimate insult. All her frustration, her jealousy of this woman's beauty and bearing, and the racist bile that had been churning inside her, erupted. "Embarrass myself?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "You're the one who should be embarrassed. This card is fake, and you are a fraud. This is a respectable bank for respectable people. We do not serve your money here." She snatched the platinum signature card and the driver's license from the counter. "These are evidence. You're not leaving this bank until the police arrive." The impasse was absolute. Two women locked in a battle of wills in the center of the marble lobby. One was armed with intolerance and an unfounded sense of authority, her face flushed and contorted with rage. The other was armed only with her unbreakable dignity, her expression a mask of glacial calm. Serafina simply stood there with perfect posture, her gaze fixed on Clara. She did not plead. She did not argue. She simply waited. This unsettling stillness exasperated Clara more than any outburst of anger. It was the calm of someone who knew with absolute certainty that she held the winning hand. Clara, however, was convinced she was in control. She believed she had cornered a common criminal, and the imminent arrival of law enforcement would be her vindication. The whispers in the lobby grew louder. Clients watched intently, some recording the scene on their phones. Clara felt a surge of triumph. Let them see. Let the entire city see how she, Clara Voss, protected the sanctity of sterling trust. "You should have stayed on your side of the city," she hissed, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, yet still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You people make a little money and think you can just walk into our world. This is a lesson you needed to learn." Serafina's composure remained flawless, but a dangerous light ignited in her eyes. It was the look of a queen who had just been grievously insulted by a courtier. "The lesson you will learn today, Ms. Voss, will not be mine," she said softly, yet with the hardness of diamond. Frustrated by the lack of panic, Clara played what she believed was her trump card. My cousin is the district attorney. My husband plays golf with Judge Albright. This little stunt of yours is going to cost you years of your life." She was constructing a fantasy of her own power, a web of connections she believed made her untouchable. It was at that moment that the heavy glass doors of the bank swung wide, and Officer Rhett Kane walked in. He was a man in his 40s with a thick neck and an imposing build forged by a decade of policing the city's most dangerous neighborhoods. His uniform was impeccably pressed, but his face carried a premature jowl. His physical presence had softened from the lean muscle of his academy days into the bulk of a man who enjoyed his donuts. He saw the world in black and white, cops and criminals, and he had a finely tuned instinct for deciding who was which based on the color of their skin. He spotted Clara at once. She greeted him with a triumphant flick of her wrist. "Officer Kane, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice full of relief and feigned distress. Kane surveyed the scene. He saw the white woman, professional, well-dressed, a pillar of the community looking agitated. Then he saw the black woman, tall, dazzlingly beautiful, in that impossible green dress. His mind, conditioned by years of discrimination, made an instant calculation. He did not see a possible victim of a misunderstanding. He saw a statistical anomaly, a question that required a suspicious answer. "What's the problem, Clara?" he asked in a familiar, friendly tone. He did not look at Serafina. He ignored her deliberately, a small but significant act of psychological dominance. "This woman," Clara said, pointing at Serafina with a trembling finger, "is attempting to commit bank fraud. She's using a high-limit forged bank card and fake identification to try to withdraw $100,000. Officer Kane finally turned his attention to Serafina. His eyes performed a slow, insolent appraisal of her body, lingering on the curve of her bust before finally meeting her gaze. He let out a low whistle. $100,000. Ambitious. You must be good at what you do, sweetheart." His condescension was so thick, it could have been cut with a knife. Serafina said nothing. Her silence stood in stark contrast to Clara's frantic accusations. She simply looked at the officer with a steady, clear gaze, evaluating him. She saw the casual cruelty in his eyes, the self-satisfied set of his jaw. She knew at once that he was not there to investigate. He was there to enforce Clara's will, the system she had been warned about, the one her father had tried to shield her from. It was standing right in front of her with a badge. The trap, it seemed, was not for her. It was for them. And they were walking into it with cheerful, ignorant confidence. Officer Kane puffed his chest slightly, savoring the authority of the moment. He was the law, and in his world, that meant his judgment was absolute and instantaneous. He saw a simple case, a woman who looked out of place, an accusation from a trusted source, a bank manager he knew from his patrol route, and a scenario that fit perfectly with his preconceived notions about crime in the city. There was no need for a lengthy investigation or hearing both sides. His job was to restore order. And order in this case meant removing the disruptive element. "All right, let's see some ID," he said to Serafina in a bored, dismissive tone, as if dealing with a routine nuisance. "I have already given my identification to the bank manager," Serafina stated calmly. "She has it, along with my private banking card." Kane turned to Clara, who held up the license and the black card like trophies. "Here they are, officer. Both forgeries, I'm certain." Kane took them, glanced at the driver's license, and snorted. "Serafina Sterling. Seriously? That's the name you chose?" He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." He did not even bother looking at the bank card. He had already decided. He slipped both items into his breast pocket. "Well, you've had your fun. You're under arrest for attempted bank fraud and identity theft." He reached for the metal handcuffs hanging from his belt. The metallic click as he unfastened them echoed through the silent lobby. For the first time, Serafina spoke directly to him, her voice still calm, but now carrying a resonance of cold, hard steel. "Officer, you have conducted no investigation whatsoever. You have not asked me a single question about the transaction. You are making an arrest based solely on the word of a woman who has already demonstrated clear and profound racial prejudice. This is an unlawful arrest." The quiet, legalistic language seemed to enrage Kane. He was a street cop, accustomed to dealing with shouting, crying, or panicked denials. This silent, articulate challenge from a woman he had already labeled a criminal was an affront to his authority. "Resisting arrest. Add that to the list," he said with contempt, taking a threatening step toward her. "You think you're some kind of lawyer? You can tell it to the judge. Now turn around and put your hands behind your back." "I will not," Serafina said. She simply did not move. She did not raise her hands in defense. She stood firm, a statue of dignity against his growing aggression. "You are making a mistake that will have unimaginable consequences." The threat, spoken with such calm, was the final straw. Kane's face hardened. The pretense of professional duty vanished, replaced by the raw aggression of a challenged bully. "You know what the problem is with people like you," he said in a low, growling voice. "You think you can talk your way out of anything, but you know what's more eloquent than words." He did not wait for an answer. He lunged at her and seized her arm. His thick fingers dug into the soft skin of her bicep, wrinkling the delicate silk of her dress. It was a movement of unnecessary, scandalous violence. Serafina did not cry out. She did not flinch. Yet her gaze turned glacial. "I told you to turn around," Kane shouted, yanking her arm hard. The raw physical aggression committed in the bright public space of the bank lobby was a visceral violation. Clients stood open-mouthed. A woman in the corner gave a soft cry. Cole looked as though he might be sick. Clara Voss, however, watched with an expression of triumphant satisfaction. This was the confirmation she had craved. The disruptive element was being dominated, put in its place exactly as it should be. The system was working. Kane twisted Serafina's arms behind her back with a grunt of effort. She did not resist, but neither did she help him. Her body was a column of passive resistance. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. The final click was a definitive sound, the sound of a line being crossed, a sound that would echo through the highest corridors of the city. In her moment of victory, Clara could not resist one last gloating jab. "You should have known your place," she whispered, as Kane began guiding the handcuffed Serafina toward the door. "There are people who simply don't belong in a place like this." Serafina paused and turned her head slightly to look at them both over her shoulder. Her face was a mask of serene neutrality, but her eyes burned with a cold fire. "You're right," she said, in a clear voice that carried through the entire lobby. "There are people who don't." Then, with her head held high, she allowed Officer Kane to escort her out of the bank. She walked not as a detained criminal, but as a queen being escorted from a room where a death sentence had just been pronounced. The transition from the opulent, sunlit cathedral of Sterling Trust to the dirty, cramped back seat of Officer Kane's patrol car was a chilling descent. The air inside the vehicle was thick with the strong smell of stale coffee, cheap air freshener, and the faint metallic scent of fear. Serafina sat with an almost supernatural stillness, her hands cuffed behind her back, the emerald silk of her dress bunched uncomfortably around her. The rough vinyl of the seat stuck to her skin. Kane drove with unnecessary aggression, taking corners too fast, braking too hard, a petty display of physical dominance over his captive. He was trying to rattle her, to break the unsettling composure that had so enraged him. He failed. Serafina remained silent, her gaze fixed on the urban landscape passing beyond the window. She was not panicking. Her sharp analytical mind was already processing the events, cataloging the injustices, and planning her next move. The assault, the unlawful arrest, the public humiliation. These were no longer merely personal insults. They were data. They were evidence. She was a woman who had been trained from childhood to navigate complex systems and understand the mechanisms of power. Her father, Arthur Sterling, had not raised a spoiled princess. He had raised a strategist. He had taught her that true power did not lie in reacting emotionally, but in absorbing, analyzing, and then responding with overwhelming, decisive force. They arrived at Precinct 12, a grim concrete fortress that seemed to absorb the light and hope from its surroundings. Kane marched her through the bullpen with a self-satisfied smile, enjoying the appreciative looks from his fellow officers. They saw a beautiful black woman, elegantly dressed and handcuffed, and drew their own conclusions. Serafina ignored their leering gazes, remaining completely focused. They took her to a processing room, a small windowless cube painted a nauseating institutional green. The process was designed to be dehumanizing. She was ordered to stand against the wall. Her handbag was dumped unceremoniously onto a metal table, its valuable contents spilling out. A slim phone, designer lipstick, her wallet, a small leather notebook. Another officer, a tired, overweight sergeant with coffee stains on his uniform, began cataloging her belongings with agonizing slowness. Designer bag, contents, he grunted, poking at the items with a pen. Kane leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, trying to get a rise out of her. Big day for you, huh? Going from Sterling Trust to the city lockup. Quite a fall from grace. Serafina finally spoke, her voice stripped of emotion. Under state law, I have the right to a phone call. I would like to make it now. The sergeant looked up, surprised by the direct, articulate demand. Yeah. Settle down. He finished his paperwork and nodded toward a grimy phone bolted to the wall in the corner of the room. One call, local only, make it quick. Kane removed one of the handcuffs, leaving the other secured to a metal bar on the wall. The cuff scraped against her wrist, a constant, stinging reminder of her situation. She walked to the phone with calm, measured movements. Kane and the sergeant watched, expecting a frantic, tearful call to a boyfriend or a desperate plea to a public defender. They leaned against the wall, smirking, prepared for the inevitable collapse. Serafina lifted the receiver. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call a friend. With a steady hand, she dialed from memory a 10-digit number, a number that connected to no registered residence or office, a number that bypassed switchboards and secretaries. It was a private, secure line, a direct link to the hidden nerve center of the city's power structure. It was answered on this first ring. Yes, said a deep, resonant voice. There was no greeting, only an expectant word. Dad, it's me, Serafina said, her voice as calm as if she were calling to discuss dinner plans. The two officers in the room exchanged a confused glance. Dad? Serafina, is everything all right? The concern on the other end was immediate, cutting through the secure line with palpable force. I'm fine, Dad, but there's been an incident, she said. I've been arrested. There was a sepulchral silence on the other end. For several long seconds, the only sound was the faint electronic hiss of the connection. The man on the other end of the line, Arthur Sterling, was processing the impossible. Where are you? He asked finally, in a voice dangerously low and stripped of all warmth. It was the voice he used in boardrooms just before dismantling a company. the voice that made titans of industry tremble. "Precinct 12, she answered. "I was at the downtown branch of the bank. The manager, a woman named Clara Voss, accused me of fraud. She and a police officer named Kane assaulted me." Another pause, this one shorter, more threatening. "Define assaulted," he said, the words cold and sharp as surgical steel. "The manager refused my transaction and publicly accused me of being a criminal. Then Officer Kane arrived, refused to investigate, and when I questioned the legality of his actions, he grabbed me, twisted my arm, and handcuffed me in the middle of the lobby." The fury on the other end of the line was not a sound. It was a feeling. It was a shift in pressure, a drop in temperature that Serafina sensed even through the phone. She had just lit the fuse on a barrel of dynamite. "Stay calm, Serafina," her father said, his voice now low and contained. "Do not say another word to anyone. Do not sign anything. I will handle this. The world is about to turn upside down for Ms. Voss and Officer Kane. I will be there soon." The line went dead. Serafina calmly replaced the receiver. The call had lasted less than 90 seconds. She turned to the two officers with an unreadable expression. "What? You called your daddy?" Kane mocked, stepping forward to recuff her hand to the bar. "Is he going to come down here and bail you out?" "Something like that," Serafina said quietly. Kane laughed. He had no idea that the man on the other end of the call was not just any father. He was the man whose name was on the building where this all began, the owner of the board, the man who employed the mayor, and who on more than one occasion had personally funded the very police department that now held his daughter captive. The officers believed they had witnessed a pathetic call from a common criminal. In reality, they had just received their own death sentences. Arthur Sterling sat in the profound silence of his study, the phone still in his hand. The room was his sanctuary, a vast two-story library lined from floor to ceiling with rare leather-bound books. It was a space of quiet contemplation, a world removed from the noise and vulgarity of modern commerce. From this room, with a few discreet calls, he could move markets, choose politicians, and reshape the city's skyline. He was a man who valued order, privacy, and control above all else. His power was immense, but it was a silent power, rarely displayed, like a latent tsunami beneath a calm sea. Now that calm had been broken, and the wave was about to rise. The news of his daughter's arrest was not merely an insult. It was a fundamental violation of the order of his world. Serafina was the center of his universe. He had adopted her as a baby, a beautiful, brilliant little girl left with nothing, and he had poured into her all the love of his widowed heart. He had given her his name, his wealth, and his protection. He had built a fortress of privilege around her in the hope of shielding her from the very ugliness she had just encountered. To know that a low-level bank manager and a street thug with a badge had dared to lay hands on her, to humiliate her, awakened in him a fury so cold and pure it was terrifying. It was the ancient, primal rage of a father whose child has been harmed. He did not shout. He did not pace. He simply sat in his leather armchair as the silence in the room grew denser, colder. His mind, a precise instrument of strategy and consequence, began to move. He was not thinking about freeing Serafina. That was a given, a minor logistical detail. He was thinking about eradication. He was thinking about ensuring that those responsible, and the system that enabled them, were dismantled so completely that no one would ever again dare to look at his daughter with malice. After a full minute of silent, contained fury, he hung up the phone and answered another dedicated line on his desk. He pressed a speed dial button. "Marcus," he said in a low growl. "Arthur, is everything all right?" The voice on the other end belonged to Marcus Thorne, senior partner of the most powerful and feared law firm in the state. He was not merely Arthur's attorney. He was his counselor, his field marshal. "No," Arthur said flatly. "They have Serafina. They arrested her. She's at Precinct 12. A sharp intake of breath came from the other end. "Give me the names," Marcus said, his voice shifting instantly from collegial to predatory. "The downtown branch manager, Clara Voss, and a police officer named Kane. Those ghosts in essence," Marcus said simply. "I'm mobilizing the entire firm. We'll have a team of our best litigators at the precinct in short order. They won't ask for her release. They will demand it. What other instructions do you have?" "I want them ruined, Marcus," Arthur said, and the words fell like shards of ice. "Not just fired. I want their careers destroyed. I want their finances shattered. I want the full and complete attention of the United States Department of Justice. Use our contacts in Washington. This was not merely an assault. It was a hate crime. I want federal charges filed." "It will be done," Marcus said, with grim satisfaction in his voice. "And the bank. I will handle the bank myself," Arthur said. "Marcus, find out who the captain of Precinct 12 is. I want to know who is running the zoo. In 5 minutes I'll have his name, his service record, and his home address on my day." Marcus replied. Arthur hung up. The legal arm of his response was in motion, a machine of overwhelming force swinging into action. Then he took his personal cell phone and dialed another number from memory. "Mayor Croft," he said, dispensing with formalities. The mayor, a man whose campaign Arthur had single-handedly financed, nearly dropped the phone. A direct call from Arthur Sterling was the political equivalent of a divine summons. "Arthur, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he stammered with forced cheer. "There is no pleasure, Robert," Arthur said in a voice that froze the mayor's blood. "My daughter, Serafina Sterling, is currently being held in a cell in your Precinct 12. She was arrested in my bank on a fraud charge by an Officer Kane. I am holding you personally responsible for her immediate safety and release. I suggest you call your police commissioner and tell him to fix this, or the generous funding the Sterling Foundation provides to this city's social programs and to your political future will evaporate before nightfall." The mayor began to sweat profusely. "Arthur, I had no idea. I'll get on it right now. Consider it resolved." "I take that as given," Arthur said, and hung up. He had just activated the two primary levers of his power, the law and politics. The machinery was now in full motion. He rose and walked to the large window overlooking the manicured gardens of his estate. He was no longer merely a father. He was a king whose realm had been attacked, and he had just unleashed his armies. The retribution would be swift, total, and merciless. The city's infrastructure of power, a complex and often invisible web of influence, favors, and fear, reacted to Arthur Sterling's commands with the speed and efficiency of a neural network. It was a system he had built over a lifetime, a silent empire of loyalty and obligation. The two calls were like stones dropped into a still pond, and the ripples were about to become a tidal wave. In the opulent offices of Thorne and Associates in the heart of the city, Marcus Thorne's quiet but threatening baritone voice rang out over the intercom. "Code Nightingale," he announced. The phrase was a rare trigger reserved for crises involving the Sterling family directly. Within seconds, the entire 40th floor, home to the firm's most relentless litigators, shifted from a quiet corporate environment into a wartime command center. Attorneys specializing in civil rights, criminal defense, and corporate crime gathered in the main conference room with grim, focused faces. They were the firm's apex predators, the legal equivalent of a SEAL team, and they had just received an extermination order. Marcus Thorne presided at the head of the table, a map of the city on the giant screen behind him, with a blinking red dot over Precinct 12. "Serafina Sterling is being held unlawfully," he declared, his voice cutting through the room. "The charge is fabricated bank fraud. The arresting officer is Rhett Kane. The complainant is a bank manager named Clara Voss. Our objective is twofold. First, the immediate and unconditional release of Ms. Sterling. Second, the total and absolute legal annihilation of Kane and Voss. I want civil lawsuits filed before the day is out. I want a formal request for a federal hate crime investigation delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office within the hour. Go." The team dispersed with silent, terrifying efficiency, snapping their briefcases shut as if loading weapons. Simultaneously, in a luxuriously appointed office at City Hall, Mayor Elias Croft was in full panic. He paced back and forth across his office, pale and with trembling hands, screaming into the phone at the city's police commissioner. "I don't care what you're doing. Drop it," the mayor shouted. "Do you have any idea who you've arrested? This isn't some ordinary woman. This is Arthur Sterling's daughter. Arthur Sterling, the man who owns this city, who owns you and me." The commissioner on the other end, a heavy-set bureaucrat named Henderson, stammered. "My man said it was a solid fraud allegation." "They're idiots!" the mayor roared. "I want her released now. I want an honor guard escorting her home. And I want Officer Kane's badge, gun, and career on my desk in the next 30 minutes. Or you can start looking for work as a mall security guard. Do you understand me?" The commissioner understood. The fear in the mayor's voice was contagious. He hung up and immediately dialed Precinct 12 with the same fury and panic in his voice. While the highest spheres of the city's power crumbled, Arthur Sterling prepared himself. He walked from his study to his dressing room, a space larger than most apartments. He removed his casual cashmere sweater and trousers. With the meticulous care of a general donning battle armor, he began to dress. An immaculate white shirt, a dark, severe, perfectly tailored Savile Row suit, a simple and elegant silver-gray silk tie. He fastened a Philippe Patek watch on his wrist. He was not merely dressing. He was putting on a uniform. The uniform of the quiet, understated billionaire who was about to remind the world of the terrifying, absolute power he wielded. He was going to the bank. It was his bank. His name was carved in stone above the door, and he was about to perform an exorcism. He walked to his garage, ignoring the fleet of luxury vehicles, and climbed into the rear of a black armored Maybach. "To the downtown branch, James," he told his driver. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," the driver replied, without a trace of surprise in his voice. The car pulled out of the long private driveway and merged into city traffic. It moved like a shark among smaller fish, silent, dark, and unstoppable. Inside, Arthur Sterling sat in perfect stillness, hands resting on his knees. His face was a mask of cold, contained rage. The system was in motion. The lawyers were descending. The politicians were scrambling. The first stage of his response was underway. Now it was time for the personal touch. It was time for the king to visit his castle and deal with the traitor in his court. Back at Precinct 12, ignorance was bliss. Officer Kane was in the break room recounting the story of his heroic arrest to a captive audience of fellow officers. He exaggerated the details, casting himself as a shrewd, sharp-eyed cop who had single-handedly thwarted a sophisticated criminal operation. "And she had this whole Queen of the Nile routine," he said, gesturing with a half-eaten donut. Looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're making a mistake. Can you believe the nerve?" His colleagues laughed in admiration. They reveled in the simple, shared worldview of their tribe. They had taken a criminal off the street. They were the good guys. The world made sense. Their comfortable camaraderie was interrupted by the voice of the precinct captain, shouting from his office at the end of the hallway, "Kane, my office, now!" The tone was not one of praise. It was the sound of pure, some pure, undiluted panic, a sound none of them had ever heard from their gray-haired, unflappable Captain Donovan Hale. Kane's smirk faded. He wiped the powdered sugar from his mouth and swaggered down the hallway with a knot of unease in his stomach. Captain Hale stood behind his desk, his face red and blotchy with fury. He held the phone as if it were a venomous snake. He had just hung up with the commissioner. "What the hell did you do, Rhett?" Hale roared as Kane entered the office. "What are you talking about, Cap? I made a solid collar. Bank fraud. The manager at Sterling Trust reported it herself," Kane said, his confidence wavering. "Sterling Trust," Hale's voice cracked. "You arrested a woman at Sterling Trust. And her last name wouldn't happen to be Sterling, would it?" A cold terror seized Kane. "Yeah, Serafina Sterling. It's on the fake ID. How'd you know?" Captain Hale looked as though he were about to have a heart attack. He slammed the phone down on the desk. "Because that fake ID belongs to Arthur Sterling's daughter, you goddamn idiot. The commissioner just got off the phone with the mayor, who just got off the phone with God himself. The entire city is about to come down on our heads because of you." Kane went pale. Arthur Sterling. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. He was a ghost, a legend, a man whose influence was so vast it was almost mythical. And Kane had just arrested his daughter. "I didn't know," Kane stammered, trying to grasp the magnitude of his error. "The manager, Clara Voss, she said she was a con artist. She's a bank manager." "You're a cop. Your job is to investigate, not to be the attack dog for some rich bigot," Hale shouted, his panic turning to rage. "You screwed up, Kane. You screwed up on a level I've never seen in 30 years on this force." Before Kane could respond, the front desk sergeant burst into the office, eyes wide with alarm. "Captain, you have to see this." Hale and Kane followed him into the main bullpen. Every officer was standing, staring at the entrance to the precinct. A silent, formidable group of men and women in impeccable dark suits had just walked into the building. There were 5 of them. They moved with a synchronized, predatory confidence that made the entire precinct feel shabby and incompetent. They were not police. They were not federal agents. They were something else, something far more expensive and dangerous. The man in the lead, with perfectly styled silver hair and a face that radiated absolute power, walked straight to the front desk. "I am Marcus Thorne," he announced in a quiet voice that somehow filled every corner of the room. "I am counsel for Ms. Serafina Sterling. I am here to retrieve my client, and then I am going to own this building." Captain Hale felt his knees weaken. Marcus Thorne, the Wolf of Wall Street, the most feared attorney in the state. He was not there to file a complaint. He was there to raze the precinct to the ground. The first wave of Arthur Sterling's wrath had just made landfall. The arrival of Marcus Thorne and his legal team was not a negotiation. It was a conquest. They advanced through Precinct 12 with the cold, unstoppable force of a glacier. Experienced, cynical officers stepped aside before them like frightened sheep. The atmosphere in the bullpen shifted from confusion and panic to a state of pure terror and awe. These were not the overworked, underpaid public defenders the police were used to seeing. These were titans, warriors from a different, more powerful world, and their mere presence was a judgment. Marcus Thorne walked directly to Captain Hale, whose face had gone from red to a sickly pale. Thorne's eyes, the color of ice shards, held no warmth and no room for compromise. "You are Captain Donovan Hale," Thorne declared. It was not a question. "You are the commanding officer responsible for the unlawful detention and assault of my client, Serafina Sterling. Where is she?" She's being processed," Hale stammered. His authority had completely evaporated. "That is unacceptable," Thorne said flatly. "You will place her in my custody immediately, unconditionally, along with a formal written apology from you and from the officer who arrested her for the gross incompetence and criminal misconduct of this department. One of Thorne's partners, a woman with a sharp, hawk-like face, stepped forward and placed a thick leather-bound portfolio on the desk. "This is a preliminary notice of claim, Captain," she said in a crisp, precise voice. "We are suing you personally, as well as Officer Kane, the city, and this department for $10 million for civil rights violations, false imprisonment, assault, and battery. This is, of course, only the opening figure. It will increase with every second my client remains in your custody." $10 million. Hale felt the air leave his lungs. They were suing him personally. His pension, his house, everything he had worked for his entire life was about to be incinerated. "And as for you, Officer Kane," Thorne said, turning his glacial gaze on the now trembling policeman, "you are a disgrace. You have abused your authority, violated your oath, and physically assaulted an innocent, unarmed woman. By the time I am finished with you, your name will be so toxic you will not be able to get a job as a security guard at a kennel." He turned back to Hale. "Bring me my client, now." Terrified, Hale practically ran to the processing room. He shouted at the sergeant to release Serafina. When the door opened, she was sitting quietly in a chair, an image of grace amid the filth. Thorne's team swept into the room. One attorney immediately began photographing the bruised arm where Kane had grabbed her. Another handed her a bottle of water. A third, a woman with a kind but firm demeanor, draped a cashmere shawl over her shoulders. Marcus Thorne approached her. His expression softened for the first time. "Serafina," he said gently, "are you all right?" "I'm fine, Uncle Marcus," she answered, with the affection she had given him since childhood. "Thank you for coming." "Your father sent us," he said. "We're getting you out of here." They escorted her out of the processing room and back into the bullpen. The transformation was stunning. The criminal who had been dragged in earlier was now the center of an assault of immense power. The humbled officers watched her pass in stunned silence. As they reached the exit, Officer Kane, desperate to salvage something, to offer some pathetic excuse, stepped forward. "Ma'am, Miss Sterling, I'm so sorry," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I didn't know. I was just doing my job. The manager said—" Serafina stopped. She turned to look at him. Her expression held neither anger nor triumph. It held pity. "Your job, officer," she said in a quiet but clear voice, "is to protect and serve all citizens, not only the ones who look like you. You did not fail because you didn't know who I was. You failed because you didn't care who I was. And that is a failure for which you will now be held accountable." Then she turned and walked out of the precinct, leaving Officer Kane alone in the middle of the bullpen. The weight of his catastrophic error finally crushed him. He was no longer a police officer. He was a defendant, and the life he had known was over. The legal storm had broken. Now the personal one was about to erupt. While the legal and political machinery Arthur Sterling had set in motion began dismantling the careers of Officer Kane and Captain Hale. The armored Maybach came to a silent stop in front of the downtown branch of Sterling Trust. The imposing marble facade with the name Sterling carved in 3-foot letters above the entrance had always been a quiet source of pride for him. Today it felt stained, defiled by the ugliness that had taken place within its walls. He did not wait for his driver to open the door. He stepped out of the car with a speed and determination that belied his age. The bank's security guards, accustomed to the slow, majestic pace of their wealthy clientele, jumped at his sudden appearance. One of them, a young man, moved to open the door, then froze as he recognized the face from the gold-framed portrait that hung in the lobby. It was Arthur Sterling, the founder, the chairman, the myth. He was not supposed to be real. He certainly was not supposed to be here on an ordinary weekday afternoon. His face was a mask of glacial fury. Arthur Sterling entered his bank. The quiet bustle of commerce ceased. A wave of silence radiated from him. Every client, every teller, every employee froze as if he had flipped a switch. They recognized him instantly. He was a ghost from the company letterhead, a legend come to life, and his presence was as shocking and transcendent as a solar eclipse. He ignored them all. His gaze, like that of a hawk, swept the lobby and locked onto the glass-walled office of the branch manager. He began walking toward it, his polished shoes striking the marble floor with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a funeral march. Inside her office, Clara Voss was on the phone with her husband, basking in the glow of her apparent victory. "Honey, you should have seen it," she said with a triumphant laugh. "I told you I know how to handle these people. I probably just saved the bank millions. Mr. Sterling himself will surely call to thank me." Her assistant, Jennifer, burst into the office without knocking, her face pale with terror. "Ms. Voss, you have to, she stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence as she pointed a trembling finger toward the lobby. Clara's smile faded, replaced by irritation. "What is it, Jennifer? Can't you see I'm on the phone?" She turned to look through the window, and her blood ran cold. The tall, imposing figure in the dark suit walking directly toward her office with the inexorable force of fate was the man from the portrait. The man of her dreams. Arthur Sterling. "I have to go," she whispered into the phone, hanging up without another word. She stood, frantically smoothing her jacket, her heart pounding. He was here. He had come to thank her. Her moment had arrived. Arthur Sterling did not stop at her door. He did not knock. He simply opened it, stepped inside, and closed it gently behind him. He stood there for a moment. His immense presence seemed to absorb all the air in the room. He looked at her. His eyes held no anger, only a deep, profound, and terrifying contempt. "You are Clara Voss," he said in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet it filled the room with terrifying force. "Mr. Sterling," Clara said, her voice a little high, a fragile, nervous smile on her lips. "What an honor. I was just about to prepare a full report on the incident. I'm so glad I was here to stop that woman. The security of this bank is my highest priority." Arthur Sterling walked slowly toward the large mahogany desk that symbolized Clara's authority. He ran a finger across its polished surface. "This desk," he said in a voice still unnervingly calm, "was carved from a tree that grew on my great-grandfather's estate. This bank is not merely a business to me, Ms. Voss. It is a legacy. It is my family's name." Then he looked at her directly, and the cold fury in his eyes was so intense it felt like a physical blow. "And today you took that name and dragged it through the mud of your own petty, ignorant intolerance. You stood in the lobby of my bank and assaulted my daughter." The word hung in the air between them. Daughter. Not that woman. Not a fraud. Daughter. Clara's mind refused to process it. The carefully constructed reality she had built for herself began to fracture, the pieces shattering around her. "Daughter," she whispered, her voice a horse's croak. "But you don't have—" "You are fired, Ms. Voss," Arthur Sterling said, cutting her off, his voice like a vault door closing. "That is the least of it." The words, "you are fired," were not spoken with anger or passion. They were stated as a simple, undeniable fact, like a doctor diagnosing a terminal disease. For Clara Voss, the sentence was a mortal blow to her entire identity, her career, her status, the carefully constructed image of the powerful bank manager. Everything evaporated in an instant, leaving her exposed and terrified. She stared at Arthur Sterling, opening and closing her mouth in silence, her mind still spinning around that single cataclysmic word. "Daughter, But I didn't know, she finally managed to stammer, the classic pathetic excuse of the abuser caught in the act. How could I have known? She doesn't look like you. The racist implication, the idea that his daughter should have matched her appearance, was the final insult. Arthur Sterling's expression, which had been one of cold fury, transformed into something far worse. It became an expression of absolute finality. "You're right," he said in a dangerously soft voice. "You did not know she was my daughter. You only knew she was a black woman. And in your small, hateful world, that was enough for you to condemn her. It was enough for you to humiliate her, to accuse her of being a criminal, and to call a corrupt police officer to assault and arrest her. You did not do this because you believed you were protecting my bank. You did it because you enjoyed it. You savored the power you felt in trying to destroy a woman you believed was inferior." He took one step closer. His silent presence was more intimidating than any physical threat. "So no, Ms. Voss, you are not being fired for a mistake. You are being erased because you are a liability, a moral and financial cancer that I am now removing from my institution." He made a vague gesture around the office. "Clean out your desk. You have 5 minutes. A security team will escort you from the building. We will mail you your final paycheck, your corporate accounts, your stock options, your pension. Everything has been frozen pending the outcome of the multiple lawsuits that are being filed against you." Clara's legs failed her. She collapsed into her chair, the chair that had been her throne, and now felt like an executioner's block. Lawsuits, plural, assets frozen. This was not merely losing her job. This was losing everything. "You can't do this," she whispered, tears of self-pity filling her eyes. "I have a family, a mortgage." "You should have thought of that," Arthur said, his voice devoid of compassion, "before you decided to ruin an innocent woman's life for sport. You see, Ms. Voss, this is what happens when a person like you, a person with a small, ugly soul, is given a little power. You inevitably use it to hurt people. But you made a fatal mistake. You tried to hurt someone who could fight back." He turned to leave, his judgment delivered, his purpose fulfilled. He paused at the door and looked back at her, a crumpled, weeping figure in a designer suit. "One more thing," he said. "Marcus Thorne, my personal attorney, will be in touch. He has a special talent for making people's lives very, very difficult. I have instructed him not to rest until you are bankrupt. I want the lesson to be final, not only for you, but for anyone who believes they can use my bank as a platform for their prejudice." Then he opened the door and walked out, leaving her alone amid the ruins of her life. The entire bank lobby remained silent, watching as he walked toward the exit. 2 heavy-set men in dark suits, part of his personal security detail, entered and strode purposefully toward Clara's office to oversee her removal. The king had visited his castle, identified the poison in its heart, and excised it surgically and without mercy. The spectacle of Clara Voss, the self-proclaimed guardian of the bank's prestige, being escorted from the building with a cardboard box of her personal effects, would be a story told in the city's financial circles for years. It was the brutal, public, and exquisite annihilation of a career. The consequences cascaded with the speed and force of an avalanche. The systems of power that Clara Voss and Rhett Kane had so confidently weaponized turned against them with a ruthless efficiency they had never imagined. Serafina's departure from Precinct 12 was the first public signal of the drastic shift in power. She did not emerge as a humiliated suspect, but as a triumphant victim flanked by her team of attorneys. An elegant black car sent by Marcus Thorne waited at the curb. As she climbed in, a news van from the city's leading television station, having received an anonymous but extremely well-informed tip, pulled up with cameras already rolling. The image of the elegant woman in the emerald dress, a visible bruise on her arm, calmly exiting the precinct, surrounded by the most expensive lawyers in the state, would be the lead story on the evening news. Back at the bank, the scene was one of controlled, silent chaos. After Clara Voss had been unceremoniously escorted from the building, her face pale and streaked with tears, a team from Sterling Trust's corporate headquarters arrived at the branch. They were led by a serious, no-nonsense executive who was Arthur Sterling's right hand. The branch remained closed to the public for the rest of the day. An all-staff meeting was convened in the lobby. The executive announced the immediate termination of Clara Voss for gross professional misconduct and violation of the bank's core values. He then announced that Cole, the young teller who had shown Serafina basic human decency, would be promoted to interim manager, effective immediately. The message was clear and forceful. Cruelty would be punished and decency would be rewarded. At Precinct 12, the shock had shattered morale. Captain Hale, following the commissioner's screamed orders, had no choice but to formally suspend Officer Kane. The act of removing his badge and service weapon, a ritual of profound shame for any officer, took place in the sepulchral silence of Hale's office. Kane's face had become a mask of disbelief. He was no longer an arrogant bully. He was a terrified, unemployed man on the brink of financial and legal ruin. He was ordered to go home and await the results of an internal affairs investigation that everyone knew would be a mere formality before his termination. As Kane emptied his locker, his former colleagues avoided his gaze. The tribe had expelled him. He had brought a plague into their house, and no one wanted to associate with him. He left the building he had called his second home for a decade, not through the main door, but through a rear exit, a disgraced figure fleeing into a future he could no longer control. News of the day's events spread like wildfire through the city's elite. The story was told in hushed, awed tones, over cocktails at country clubs, and in whispers across mahogany tables in boardrooms. Arthur Sterling, the sleeping giant, had awakened. He had defended his daughter with the full, terrifying power of his empire. A line had been drawn. The old unspoken rules of prejudice, so often tolerated in their circles, had received a response so overwhelming, so absolute, that it served as a stark warning to all. The message was simple. The world was changing, and the Sterling family stood on the right side of history. That evening, Serafina sat with her father in the quiet comfort of his study. She had changed out of her emerald dress into a simple cashmere sweater and cream trousers. Marcus Thorne's cashmere shawl still rested on her shoulders. A fire crackled in the large stone fireplace. "The mayor called me," Arthur said, swirling the amber liquid in his brandy glass. "He apologized for an hour. He has personally guaranteed that the U.S. attorney for this district will open a federal investigation." "Good," Serafina said quietly. She looked into the fire, her face illuminated by the warm glow. The day had been a brutal experience, yet she felt a strange calm. The poison had been injected, and she had survived it. "I'm so sorry, Serafina," Arthur said, his voice heavy with an emotion he rarely showed. "I tried to build a world where you would never have to face that kind of ugliness." She turned to him, her gaze clear and steady. "You don't have to apologize, Dad," she said, reaching out to take his hand. "You can't protect me from the world, but you taught me how to fight, and today we fought. You taught me that our name, our power, means nothing if we do not use it to demand justice. What happened today was not only about me. It was about everyone who has ever been treated the way I was treated, but did not have a father who could set the world on fire for them." He looked at his daughter, not as a child to be protected, but as the powerful, compassionate, and wise woman she had become. The true Sterling legacy was not the bank, nor the wealth, nor the power. It was her, and the reckoning was only beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, justice, driven by the immense pressure of Arthur Sterling's influence and the relentless work of Marcus Thorne's legal team, moved with impressive speed and ferocity. This was not the slow, exhausting, and often frustrating process endured by ordinary citizens. It was a selective, high-velocity purge designed to deliver a verdict that would resonate across the entire state. The civil lawsuit was the first and swiftest victory. Confronted with the irrefutable video evidence from the bank's security cameras, which captured every word of Clara's racist tirade and every second of Kane's assault, the city's attorneys did not even attempt to fight. They settled. The city issued a formal public apology to Serafina Sterling and paid a settlement of $2 million. Serafina immediately announced that the entire sum would be used to create a new foundation dedicated to providing legal assistance to victims of police misconduct and hate crimes. She had transformed her pain into a permanent resource for others. Clara Voss and Rhett Kane were not so fortunate. The civil suit against them personally was not settled. Marcus Thorne rejected every offer, forcing them into a disastrously expensive legal battle they had no chance of winning. They were forced to sell their homes, empty their savings and retirement accounts, and were left destitute even before the trial began. The criminal process moved with equal swiftness. The U.S. attorney, eager to curry favor with the most powerful man in the city and genuinely appalled by the evidence, took the case personally. He convened a federal grand jury that returned an indictment in a single day. The charges were severe. For Clara Voss, one count of committing a hate crime by interfering with a federally protected banking activity, a charge that recognized the racist motive behind her actions. For Rhett Kane, one count of depriving a citizen of civil rights under color of law. The fact that he was a uniformed officer acting with the authority of the state exponentially aggravated his offense in the eyes of the federal government. Their trial caused a media sensation. The courtroom was packed. The video of the incident was played for the jury. The raw reality silenced the entire room. Bank employees testified about Clara's history of discrimination. Other officers were called to testify about Kane's reputation for unnecessary aggression and racial bias. Captain Hale, granted immunity for his testimony, shamefully admitted on the stand that he had intended to cover up the incident until he received the call from above. The defense was pathetic. Their attorneys tried to argue that it had all been a misunderstanding, a stressful situation that had escalated, but they could not argue with the video. They could not argue with the audio. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The sentencing was a brutal conclusion. The federal judge, an older, stern man with a reputation for toughness on civil rights violations, looked at the two defendants with open contempt. "Ms. Voss," he began, his voice resonating through the silence of the courtroom, "you occupied a position of trust and authority. You used it not to serve your clients, but to indulge your own intolerance. You are a symbol of the casual country club racism that this society can no longer tolerate. I sentence you to 3 years in federal prison." Clara broke down in tears. The judge turned to Kane. "Mr. Kane, your crime is in many ways even more atrocious. You took an oath. You wore a badge that represents justice and protection for all. You turned that badge into a weapon of oppression. You are the reason the trust between communities and law enforcement is so fractured. To send the message that this behavior will not be tolerated, I sentence you to 5 years in federal prison." 5 years. A gasp of astonishment swept the room. It was a far harsher sentence than expected, a clear signal from the federal government. As the U.S. Marshals led the broken, weeping figures of Clara Voss and Rhett Kane from the courtroom, They began their new lives as convicted federal felons. The purge was complete. Justice had been delivered, swift and terrible. A year later, the city had found a new equilibrium. The story of Serafina Sterling's ordeal and the subsequent legal upheaval had become local legend, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and police locker rooms. Precinct 12 had been completely overhauled. Captain Hale had been forced into early retirement, and a new reform-minded captain had been brought in to change its toxic culture. Sterling Trust Bank had launched a massive, well-funded diversity and inclusion initiative, with Serafina herself joining the board of directors to oversee its implementation. The changes were not merely cosmetic, they were structural, the direct result of one woman's refusal to be a victim. On a clear afternoon, Serafina stood on the observation deck of the new Serafina Sterling Pediatric Pavilion at the municipal hospital. Final touches were being put on the building, a state-of-the-art facility her anonymous donation had made possible. In the main atrium below stood the large-scale sculptures she had attempted to purchase on that fateful day. Their vibrant, abstract forms filled the space with life and color. Her father, Arthur, approached her. He gazed out at the city skyline, a city that in many ways was his. "It's beautiful, Serafina," he said, looking at the pediatric wing. "A beautiful legacy. It's a beginning," she answered with a soft smile on her lips. Her life had found a new and profound purpose. She was no longer merely the daughter of a powerful man. She was a force in her own right, using her prestigious name and resources to achieve tangible change. She had transformed the worst moment of her life into a source of lasting good. "Have you heard anything about them?" she asked quietly, her gaze distant. Arthur knew whom she meant. "Marcus keeps me informed," he said. "Voss served 18 months and was released to a halfway house. Her husband divorced her. She's working as a call center operator. Kane is still in federal prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 2 years. His wife left him as well. They lost everything." Serafina was silent for a long moment. There was no triumph in her heart, no joy in their ruin. There was only a quiet, somber sense of closure. "They built their own prisons," she said, echoing the words she had spoken to her father a year earlier. "Prisons of hate. The bars on the doors were only a formality." She turned to her father, her eyes shining with a deep and enduring love. "Thank you, Dad. Not for the power or the money. Thank you for teaching me what they're for." He put his arm around her, and together they looked out over the city. A moment of casual, ugly prejudice had met with a response of overwhelming force. But the final victory was not the destruction of two hate-filled people. It was the building of something new in their place, a renewed commitment to justice, a new center of healing, and the emergence of a new leader who understood that the true measure of power is not the ability to crush enemies, but the wisdom and compassion to build a better world for everyone. And so our story ends, not with the metallic clang of a prison door, but with the quiet dedication of a hospital wing. It does not end in a moment of vengeance, but in an act of creation. Serafina Sterling took the poison of hatred that had been directed at her and, rather than allowing it to consume her, transformed it into an antidote for the community. She proved that the most powerful response to darkness is not to curse it, but to create a light so bright that it forces the shadows to retreat. Her story shows that while prejudice can be strong and violent, the unwavering pursuit of justice, driven by compassion, will always, in the end, be stronger. What do you think of the sentences that were handed down? Was the total dismantling of their lives a fair price for their actions? And what can all of us do to ensure that a person's character, not their appearance, is the only thing that matters? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective is what makes this community so vital. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, please support it by giving it a like and subscribing for more stories that challenge and inspire.